If one evening out on the frontier, with the sun hanging low and red like fire above the far ridges, you saw a young girl wandering alone across the barren prairie, what would you do? Would you call out and beckon her closer, or keep your distance, afraid that her figure might be nothing more than a mirage in the heat? Think carefully, because out here in the American West of 1887, nothing was ever simple. A small silhouette, hair tangled by the dusty wind, might carry within it an entire family tragedy, the hint of a new beginning, or a dire warning of death itself. Before we ride further into this tale, let me pause to invite you, our viewers, especially those of you seasoned by years and hardships of your own, to hit that subscribe button. I promise, the stories we tell here aren't just Western yarns. They're slices of real life, full of survival and loss, faith and grit. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remind you that no matter how long the night stretches, there is always a dawn waiting to break. Now, let's return to the year 1887. Wyoming lay parched beneath a merciless drought, 3 seasons long without a decent rain. Where tall grass had once waved in the wind, now only brittle stubble remained. The ground split wide with cracks like broken pottery. Cattle bawled hollowly, horses grew gaunt, and men and women lived with silent hunger. On that hard earth, a name was fading into the dust: Clara Mae Donnelly. She was 19 years old, but grief had aged her far beyond it. Only half a year earlier, both her parents had died within days of each other from cholera. The small clapboard home on the edge of the prairie was taken swiftly by the bank. Neighbors, struggling themselves, offered little more than a handful of jerky and advice: head toward Fort Laramie. Maybe you'll find work. But Fort Laramie lay nearly 100 miles away. For a girl alone, it might as well have been across the ocean. Still, Clara walked, head bowed against the wind, feet sinking into white alkali dust, her mother's hand-me-down boots torn open, letting sand and pebbles grind into her skin until it bled. Every mile drained her life further. Her food was long gone, the last of the water in her canteen little more than muddy sludge. At night she curled beside cold rocks, clutching the single photograph of her family, the only proof she'd once belonged somewhere. Now she was just a worn-out body, being slowly swallowed by the prairie. One night she heard it, the pounding of hooves and drunken laughter drifting across the flats. A band of riders, rowdy and crude. Clara pressed herself into a narrow rock crevice, heart hammering so hard she thought it would give her away. She held her breath, knowing that if they found her, fate would be far crueler than hunger or thirst. The riders passed on, leaving behind only the stench of whiskey and echoes of their laughter. But from then on, Clara understood death didn't just come from the land it wore human faces to. Day after day she trudged on, until at last a sound carried on the wind, the lowing of cattle. Her head lifted in disbelief. Where there were cattle, there was water. Where there was water, there was life. But fear surged in her chest too. What if the men she found were no better than the riders from before still? Choice had deserted her. Behind her lay certain death. Ahead, however uncertain, there was at least a chance. That evening the sun blazed red, burning the land into a sea of fire. Clara stood atop a rise, shading her eyes. In the distance the valley opened, and there it was. Three Spurs Ranch. Weathered wooden buildings, fences freshly mended, and a thin creek flashing silver under the dying light. For a heartbeat her heart leapt. Then fear rushed back in. Would these strangers take her in, or shut the door in her face as so many others had? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a faded blue ribbon, her mother's wedding ribbon, the last token of gentler times. Clara whispered, "Mama, forgive me, but I want to live." With that vow trembling on her lips, her legs shaking beneath her, She stepped down the slope towards Three Spurs Ranch. Each footfall carried her closer to whatever fate the West still held in its unforgiving hand. Behind her the wind rose, sending dust devils skittering across the valley floor. Somewhere overhead, a hawk cried out, sharp and lonesome against the vast sky. Clara Mae Donnelly did not look back. The first blast of wind struck Clara like the hand of some desert giant. The sky had turned a sickly yellow-brown, and to the west a dark wall of dust rolled closer, swallowing the horizon. She'd seen storms like that before, but never this near, never this fast. A sandstorm, merciless, roaring, eager to strip flesh from bone. Clara stumbled down the slope, yanking her tattered scarf across her face. Grit lashed into her eyes, stung her skin like burning needles. She lost track of how many times she fell. Each time she forced herself up again, lungs raw, vision blurred. The ranch she thought she'd seen in the valley flickered in and out of the haze, more mirage than reality. Is this where it ends? The thought screamed inside her head. Then a hand seized her reel, strong, calloused. A voice cut through the howl. Hold on this way. Girl Clara no longer had the strength to resist. She let herself be hauled forward, dragged through a doorway into sudden muffled stillness. The storm was locked outside. She collapsed onto a hard-packed dirt floor, coughing, eyes streaming from dust and tears alike. When her vision cleared, she found herself in a long wooden bunkhouse that stank of sweat, leather, and smoke. Half a dozen men loomed over her, faces burned dark by sun and wind, eyes hard and wary. They stared as though she were some ghost conjured out of the storm. One broad-shouldered man with a gray beard muttered, "Good Lord. Where'd she come from? Looks half dead already." Before she could answer, a younger hand with sandy hair and Apache mustache grinned slyly. Half dead or not, she's still a pretty little thing under all that dirt. Bet she'd clean up real fine. The words knifed through her. Fear surged. She remembered the drunken riders she'd hidden from days earlier. The danger that men could bring. Enough. Jet. The man who had dragged her inside snapped. He was tall, lean, eyes like steel. Cole Mercer, the ranch foreman. She's near done in. Any more talk like that, and you'll pack your gear and get off this spread. The bunkhouse fell silent. Clara pulled her blanket tighter around her, still trembling. Was his warning enough to hold them back, or would they circle closer once his back was turned? At least and for now, she had one ally. The door opened again, another figure stepped in, and instantly the men straightened. This one carried weight without saying a word. Mid-40s, broad through the chest, hair silvered at the temples, his eyes dark and watchful. Wyatt Hale, the owner of the Three Spurs Ranch. His gaze swept the room, fixing finally on her. Surprise flickered there, then suspicion. "What's this?" Mercer Storm spat her out, Cole answered. "About dead on her feet. Says she's got no people left. Looking for work." Wyatt stepped closer. Clara forced herself upright, swaying, her voice breaking. "I can work. Sir, I can cook, clean, anything. Just please give me a chance." The storm's howl pressed against the walls, a grim reminder of what awaited outside. The cowboys exchanged glances, smirks, shrugs, doubt. Wyatt lowered himself into a chair, eyes still fixed on her. "If I said no," he asked evenly, "where would you go in weather like this?" Her lips trembled. She had no answer. Because there was none. Out there was death. In here maybe a chance. Wyatt's sigh was heavy, the kind of sound a man makes when he's already carrying more than he wants. Get her water. Food. If there's any left. When the storm breaks, I'll decide. We're no charity house. But if she can really keep a kitchen, this place might have use for her. A spark flickered in Clara's chest, hope. Fragile, but alive. She clutched the tin cup the bearded man handed her, gulping greedily though half the water spilled down her chin. For the first time in weeks, she felt human again. Yet she could still feel the eyes of the men boring into her back, weighing her worth, her weakness. Suspicion and hope tangled inside her like barbed wire. The door to the Three Spurs Ranch had opened, but to stay. She would have to prove herself. And in this rough house, among these rougher men, her survival would depend not only on Wyatt Hale's judgment, but on her own grit and will to endure. Morning after the storm, sunlight slanted through the cracks of the kitchen shutters, painting streaks of gold across a floor still layered with dust. Clara stirred from the makeshift cot in the storeroom. All night she'd drifted in and out of restless sleep, ears still echoing with the storm's howl. Yet her heart felt lighter, for at least she had survived. And today, she knew. She would have to prove she belonged. The kitchen before her hardly resembled the heart of a home. Dust coated the long table. Pots were rusted, the stove dead cold, its ashes stale. A sour grease smell lingered in the air. Clara clenched her hands. If Mother were here, she'd have me scrubbing every inch before breakfast, she whispered, and the thought gave her strength. Without complaint, she set to work. She coaxed a flame into the stove, hauled buckets of water, scoured what she could. Her hands were thin, but the motions familiar. She'd worked beside her mother since childhood. From the pantry, she gathered what little remained: a sack of flour, a strip of salt pork, a few withered potatoes. Not much, but enough to fashion a real meal. By the time boots thudded on the porch, the smell of coffee filled the air. Pork sizzled in the skillet, biscuits browned in the oven. The cowhands filed in, still carrying the dust of corrals and the scent of horses. They froze, blinking as if they'd stepped into the wrong place. "Well, I'll be," muttered old Harlan Pike, beard streaked with gray, nose twitching. "Can't recall the last time we smelled biscuits around here." Murmurs rippled through the room, some approving, some guarded. Clara kept her composure, ladling food onto tin plates. She didn't take a serving herself, just stood by the stove, waiting. At first there was only the sound of chewing, knives scraping tin. Then a voice broke the silence. "Damn sight better than that thin gruel we've been choking down." Laughter followed, and the tension eased. A few even tipped their heads toward her, as though acknowledging she might be more than just a stray blown in by the wind. The door opened again. Wyatt Hale entered. His eyes swept the clean counters, the hot food steaming, the men quietly eating, and finally rested on Clara. Without a word, he sat at the head of the table, took a biscuit, and ate slowly. All conversation stilled. His judgment would decide if her effort meant anything. When he set his plate down, he wiped his mouth and said in his deep, steady voice, "Good. Somebody here knows how to cook. This ranch has been running without it far too long." Relief flooded Clara, though she kept her head bowed. But Wyatt wasn't finished. His gaze cut across the room, hardening. "From this day on, Miss Donnelly keeps this kitchen. She keeps this house. And let me be clear, any man here who forgets his manners toward a woman will pack his gear and ride. No wages, no second chances. Understood?" The silence was heavy. Then came a chorus of muttered, "Yes, sir." A few eyes slid away, Jed Crowley's face especially tight, but no one dared defy him. For Clara, the words were worth more than the meal itself, in a land where wandering women were often treated like goods to be bargained. Wyatt Hale had staked her honor openly before his men. It was a gift of dignity she hadn't dared hope for. After breakfast, she went straight back to work. She scrubbed the stove until it gleamed, set jars and spices in order, wiped down every soot-streaked window. Each motion was more than labor. It was her way of carving a place for herself, proving that this rough ranch could feel like a home. By evening, as the sun bled red across the valley, Clara sat on the kitchen step, palms blistered, arms aching, but her heart warm. For the first time in months, she no longer felt like an outsider. The wind carried only a gentle hush now, and in it she heard her father's voice. "Respect doesn't come free, girl. You earn it with your own hands." And today, Clara Mae Donnelly had done just that. That evening the sky sagged low, storm clouds rolling in heavy and dark from the mountains. The smell of rain hung thick in the air. After months of merciless drought, every man on the ranch seemed to hold his breath, waiting for the first drops. But for Clara, each distant rumble of thunder tightened her chest, not just fear of the storm, but memories of lonely nights on the prairie when she had no roof, no protection, no one to turn to. She had just finished her kitchen chores when she stepped out to gather the washing before the downpour. Rain pattered against the roof, beating the dust out of the shingles. The ranch yard was dim, lit only by the yellow glow spilling from the kitchen window. Clara's thin figure bent over a clothesline, clutching the last damp kerchief when a low chuckle cut through the rain. "Well now, you do work hard, Miss Clara Mae." She spun around. Jed Crowley leaned against a porch post, his hat dripping, hair plastered to his forehead. The storm water only sharpened the crooked grin on his face. I need to get back inside," Clara stammered, moving for the door. But Jed stepped into her path. The sharp bite of whiskey came off his breath. "No need to hurry. A girl like you ought to know Hale won't keep you around forever. He plays the gentleman. Sure. But me." His hand reached toward her shoulder. "I've got other ideas." Clara froze, every nerve taut. Memories of drunken riders out on the open trail came flooding back. She pressed her back against the wall, heart hammering so loud she could barely hear the storm. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling but eyes fierce. "Leave me alone." Jed smirked. "Out here. I take what I want. Nobody's gonna stop me." But just as he leaned closer, a voice thundered from the doorway, deep, commanding, and sharp as a rifle crack. "That's enough." Jed, the kitchen door flew open. Wyatt Hale stood framed in the lamplight, face carved from stone, stormlight glinting on his eyes. Right behind him loomed Cole Mercer, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. Jed flinched but forced a laugh. "Just talking. Boss. Nothing more." Wyatt strode forward, boots splashing in the mud, his gaze like steel. "On my ranch. Men don't talk to women that way. Miss Donnelly is under my protection. You lay a hand on her, and you're crossing me." The air went tight, storm rain hammering down like drum beats. Clara shrank back behind Wyatt, trembling, but for the first time in months, relief seeped through her fear. Jed tried again, voice edging toward a plea. "Mr. Hale, I've worked here 3 seasons, 3 or 30. It makes no difference. Pack your gear and ride out before sunrise. You're finished here." The words dropped like a gavel. Jed's eyes darted around, searching for support. But the other hand's faces dim in the shadows stayed silent. Not a one stepped forward. He clenched his jaw, shot Clara a hateful glare, then spun on his heel. Rain swallowed him as he stomped toward the bunkhouse, saddled his horse, and vanished into the night. For a long moment, only the storm filled the silence. Clara's knees buckled as breath rushed out of her. The terror still clung to her skin, but safety, real safety, was flooding in at last. Wyatt turned to her, his voice softer now. "Steady as bedrock, no one touches you here. You do your work. You live in peace. The rest I'll handle." Clara could only nod, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. In the lamplight, Wyatt Hale stood like a wall between her and the darkness outside. And Clara understood tonight he had not only driven danger off his land, he had given her something she thought long gone, the assurance that she was not alone anymore, that she had found a place where respect was more than just words. After that stormy night of fear, the ranch returned to its usual stillness beneath the Wyoming sky. But inside Clara, something had shifted. From the moment Wyatt Hale had stood between her and Jed Crowley, she no longer felt like a stray clinging to survival. She began to believe this place could become her home. In the days that followed, Clara poured herself into the garden behind the main house. It had once been Martha Hale's pride, but now it lay strangled with weeds, the soil cracked and dry. Most of the men only shook their heads when they passed it, dismissing it as wasted ground. But Clara saw more than ruins. She saw a chance to sow hope. At dawn, she was already outside, dew still clinging to the fence posts, her small hands tugging stubborn weeds, setting rows straight again. Her fingers grew raw, her nails packed with dirt. Yet peace filled her heart. Each time she uncovered a struggling tomato vine or a stubborn onion shoot, she cradled it as if it were treasure. Wyatt often watched from the porch, silent, arms folded. In her slight figure he saw a resilience that refused to die. Sometimes he stepped down to hand her a tool or steady a loose fence board, mostly, though he let her work, knowing she needed to prove her own worth. One blistering noon, while the crew ate the meal she had prepared, Clara spoke up. Hesitant but steady, Mr. Hale, I have an idea. Wyatt set down his spoon, his gray eyes steady but not unkind. Go on. She pointed to the map, tacked to the wall. My father used to say where willows grow. Water lies beneath. I've noticed some scraggly willows in that low ground near the Cottonwood Ridge. Maybe there's a spring under there. The room went still. These were men who trusted horses and rifles more than soil and roots. Harlan Pike, a leathery old hand of 30 years, barked a laugh. What does a slip of a girl know about wells? But Zeke Boone, the quietest of them all, nodded. Ground softer there. She might be right. Wyatt's gaze lingered on Clara. Then he gave a single, decisive nod. Tomorrow we try. This land is thirsty. If Clara's found a vein, we'll all remember it. The next day, under a pitiless sun, the men took turns with shovels and picks. At first it was nothing but dust, the dry earth groaning under steel. Clara stood nearby, heart hammering, caught between fear and hope, a foot down, then two still nothing. Sweat-soaked shirts, tempers frayed. Harlan tossed down his shovel with a curse. Waste of sweat. I told you. Clara bit her lip hard, fighting back tears. But then Zeke called out sharply, Hold on, there's damp here. All eyes turned. Sure enough, the soil was darker, cool to the touch. A few more strikes of the spade, and wet sand crumbled open. Then, at last, a trickle of water seeped through. Cheers erupted, loud and unrestrained. The ranch had found life again. Clara clutched her chest, breath stolen. It was real, her guess had been right. Wyatt laid a rough, steady hand on her shoulder. His voice carried quiet conviction. You've given this ranch back its future. Clara Mae, from this day forward, none of us will forget it. Even Harlan, grizzled and proud, dipped his head in acknowledgement, and Zeke, rare smile creasing his weathered face, added, She's got more in her than a cookpot. That's for sure. That night, over stew and fresh bread, the atmosphere was different. The men's talk was lighter. Laughter rang easier. Clara sat at the edge of the long table, listening, and felt for the first time that she truly belonged. Suspicion was giving way to trust, not only from Wyatt, but from the hardened cowhands themselves. Outside, the willows swayed in the night breeze, roots drinking deep from the spring she had helped uncover. Inside, Clara whispered a vow to herself she would keep tending this land, coaxing life out of its barren face. And she knew now, her hands were trusted here, a trust more precious than anything she had lost. The night they struck water, the ranch came alive again, A bonfire blazed in the yard, its glow painting rough-hewn faces with flickering gold. Zeke Boone pulled his fiddle, an instrument that rarely saw the light of day, and coaxed out an old frontier tune, lively and full of spirit. The cowhands clapped in rhythm, boots stomping, laughter rolling free for the first time in months. After a season of nothing but dust and fear, they finally had cause to celebrate. Clara sat at the long table, watching these men laugh like boys, and a warmth spread through her chest. Once, the sound of cowboys drinking and shouting would have sent her running for cover. But tonight was different. The air brimmed with joy, not menace. When she carried out a basket of fresh bread, the men's cheers rose around her. Clara Mae, this bread's as fine as when Mrs. Hale was alive. Harlan Pike rasped, his leathery face softened by respect. Her cheeks burned as she ducked her head. I just do the best I can. Mr. Pike. Zeke chuckled. The best we've had in years. I'd say whole place owes you. The words made her heart flutter, a shy happiness blooming where fear had once lived, when the music rose again. Someone called. A dance, let's have a dance to mark the night. Old Jake, white hair catching the firelight, offered her his hand. Clara hesitated, but the expectant grins around the fire left her no polite way out. Her scuffed shoes tapped the dirt in awkward rhythm, but the men clapped along with good-natured cheer. Then a taller shadow stepped forward. Wyatt Hale, still in his work clothes streaked with mud, stopped before her. He held out his hand, voice low and steady. May I have this honor? Clara Mae. The cowhands whooped, whistles cutting through the night. Clara's face burned hotter than the flames. Yet she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, guiding her steps with surprising ease. He kept a respectful distance, but his eyes, gray and piercing, made her heart stumble in her chest. You've brought this place back to life, he murmured, for her ears alone. Not just with the well, but with yourself. Clara faltered, gaze darting away. I only do what I can. Anyone else would do the same. Wyatt's faint smile carried both sorrow and admiration. No, most would have given up long ago. You didn't. The dance ended to thunderous applause. Clara dipped her head quickly, retreating to the shadows. But all through the meal she felt his eyes linger, soft and searching. Later, when the fire had burned low and most men drifted back to the bunkhouse, Clara carried pots to the new well to wash. Cool water spilled over her hands, easing her tiredness. Behind her, a voice rumbled, gentle but uncertain. You don't have to do it all yourself. I can help. She turned sharply. Wyatt stood a few steps away, coffee cup in hand, the lamplight catching the silver at his temples. Clara. He paused, as if gathering courage. I lost Lila over a year ago. She was a good woman, a steady partner. When she passed, I thought the rest of my life would just be empty days. I told myself that was the way of things. But then, you came. Clara's breath caught. The night was hushed except for the whisper of frogs in the low ground and the soft trickle of the well. Wyatt's voice dropped lower, almost unsteady. I won't pretend I don't still think of her. I always will. But when I look at you, I feel something stir I thought was gone forever. I want to believe I've still got the right to live, not just survive. Even if it's foolish. Clara's fingers twisted together. Gratitude warred with fear in her chest. He was her employer, her protector, yet the raw honesty in his words left her trembling. Mr. Hale, she whispered, eyes stinging. I don't know what to say. I'm just a wanderer looking for shelter. I don't want anyone to think I came here to take advantage of you. Wyatt shook his head, gaze firm and unwavering. Let folks think what they will. I only care about what's true. And what I see is a woman strong enough to breathe life into this place. I'd be proud to walk forward with you, if you'd let me." The night breeze carried the scent of fresh-turned earth, cool and alive. Clara lowered her face, her cheeks burning. She couldn't bring herself to answer, not yet. But she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a promise, not quite, but enough to kindle hope, and in that fragile hope, beneath the wide Wyoming sky, two hearts that had known loss dared to imagine something new, a chance, shy and uncertain, but real. That dawn did not rise in peace. Instead of soft light spilling across the prairie, black smoke smeared the horizon. Hooves thundered, harsh and unrelenting, like war drums rolling toward the ranch. The Blackthorn Gang had come. Wyatt Hale stepped off the porch, eyes narrowing. To arms he bellowed, his voice carrying across the yard. Men scrambled for rifles and carbines, boots pounding, curses flying. Cole Mercer tried to shove Clara behind the kitchen wall, but she shook her head, clutching an old rifle in trembling hands. "Clara, your place is in the house," Cole barked. "No," she said, voice low but steady. "This is my home now, too. I won't hide." Moments later, the raiders swept down the valley, dust boiling up around them. Savage whoops split the morning air. Then the crack of gunfire tore the silence apart. Smoke and fire filled the dawn. Clara pressed against the kitchen window, barrel quivering, in her sightline. Rose McKinnon was fleeing with little Eli in her arms. A Blackthorn rider raised his pistol at them. Clara pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted her shoulder, the report ringing in her ears, but the outlaw pitched from his saddle, dead before he hit the dirt. Rose clutched Eli tighter, eyes wide with terror giving way to gratitude. Clara barely had time to breathe before another gunshot whined past. A Blackthorn rifleman had leveled on Wyatt, who was firing from behind the corral fence without thinking. Clara burst from cover, slamming her shoulder into him. Wyatt fell hard, just as the bullet shattered the post where he had been standing. Splinters sprayed into the air. Wyatt's eyes flashed with shock and something else. "You." But there was no time for words. He hauled her up beside him, and together they returned fire. The fight dragged on like a nightmare. Yells, gunfire, the scream of horses, the metallic clash of rifle bolts. Smoke choked the yard. Men staggered and fell. At last, the tide broke. Those outlaws still alive wheeled their horses and bolted, disappearing into the scrub, leaving bodies and chaos behind. Cole stumbled forward, wiping blood from his brow. "We held him," he rasped. Wyatt turned to Clara. Her face was pale beneath the grime, sweat and soot streaking her cheeks, but her eyes burned bright, alive. He seized her hand in both of his, heedless of the eyes around them. "Clara Mae Donnelly," he said, voice rough with emotion. "You saved Rose and her boy. You saved me. I won't waste another day, hesitating." She froze, breath caught in her throat, the world still echoing with the chaos they'd survived. The ranch hands went silent, watching. Rose stood clutching Eli, tears shining as she smiled through exhaustion. Wyatt raised his voice, calling out Sheriff Amos Whitaker, Doc Evers. "You still with us from near the barn?" The sheriff, beard thick and gun still smoking, strode out with the old doctor beside him. "Here." Amos grunted. "What is it?" "Hale. Make it quick. We've got bodies to clear." Wyatt's gaze never left Clara. The rising sun blazed in his eyes, fierce and unyielding. "Right here. Right now. Join us in marriage. I don't want to wait for Blackthorn to return." The yard fell still. Clara's heart pounded, heat flooding her face. She wanted to shrink from the eyes upon her. Yet Wyatt's grip anchored her, and deep inside, she knew the truth her heart had whispered for weeks. "Mr. Hale," she murmured, tears trembling on her lashes. If this is what you truly want, then yes. Sheriff Whitaker cleared his throat, pulling a worn little book from his pocket. Doc Evers nodded solemnly, beneath the smoky dawn sky, with gunpowder still sharp in the air. The sheriff's voice rang steady. I now join Wyatt Hale and Clara Mae Donnelly in holy matrimony. May God bless this union. Cheers broke out, ragged and hoarse from throats raw with battle. Rose hugged Eli tight, smiling through tears. Wyatt and Clara faced each other, hands entwined, eyes shining with the bond forged in fire and blood. They had fought through hell together, and in that crucible of gun smoke and dawn, they had found not only survival, but each other. After the battle, dawn broke clear. Though the air still reeked of gun smoke, men moved slowly through the yard, bruised and bone-tired, but in their eyes shone the light of survival and of bonds forged in fire. And then, as if the heavens themselves sought to draw a curtain over the bloodshed, heavy clouds gathered in the west. By noon, the sky split open. Rain came down in torrents, drenching earth and men alike. The storm washed the blood from the dirt, rinsed the powder from coats and hands. Cold drops ran down Clara's cheeks, mingling with tears of joy. This was not just rain to end a drought. It was heaven's blessing on a marriage born amid smoke and fire. Wyatt stood at her side, his rare smile breaking across his weathered face. He lifted his head to the downpour, as though at last allowing himself to release the grief he had carried since Lila's passing. Weeks later, as the ranch healed from its wounds, word came from Fort Laramie the territorial authorities had awarded a handsome bounty to Wyatt Hale and his men for breaking the Blackthorn Gang, long a scourge across Wyoming. With that money, Wyatt and Clara purchased Dawson Place, a neighboring spread abandoned after old Tom Dawson's death. The land was rough, the fences sagging, the barn half collapsed, but it sat on water, flowing beneath the soil, tied to the spring Clara had helped discover. When Clara first stepped onto the Dawson property, her breath caught. The place was worn and overgrown, yet to her eyes it looked like a blank page waiting to be written upon. She tightened her fingers around Wyatt's hand. We can make this into a true home, she whispered. Not just for us, but for others who need one. Wyatt's gray eyes held hers. And you'll be the one to lead it. Clara Mae. From that day, the work began anew. Harlan Pike hauled timber to raise the horse barn. Zeke Boone and the younger hands set posts and wire. Cole Mercer managed the crews with steady discipline. And Clara Mae Hale was the beating heart of it all. She planted gardens, kept the kitchen running, welcomed neighbors who came seeking food, advice, or comfort. But her vision stretched further. One evening, as she sat with Rose McKinnon and little Eli, watching the nearby children tumble and play in the dust, an idea took root. Wyatt, she said softly, there's something more we can do. These children have never known a proper schoolroom. If we had just a small cabin, a few books, a table or two, they could learn their letters, their numbers, learn to live better than the men before them. Wyatt was silent for a long time. In a world where survival always came before learning, her words seemed bold yet deeply right. At last, he nodded. If that's your wish, then we'll build it. I'll see to a schoolhouse near the chapel at Fort Laramie. Every child in this valley will have a place to sit. And so the plan for a frontier school was born. Old volumes were gathered from town, a bundle of pencils bought with bounty money, rough-hewn desks built from pine. Clara took her place before the children, teaching patiently and tenderly. The people began to call her by a name filled with affection, the Wild Rose of Wyoming. It was not beauty they praised, but the quiet strength and renewal she brought. From a wandering orphan lost in a sandstorm, Clara had become a symbol of faith and new beginnings. Friends, if you've stayed with me to this point, you've walked beside Clara and Wyatt through hardship and danger, through fear and loss, into hope and rebirth. This isn't just a Western tale, it's a reminder that even out of grief, even out of fire and storm, life can begin again. If you believe their story deserves to be remembered, I invite you hit that like button and subscribe. In doing so, you help carry forward the spirit of the frontier courage, kindness, and the will to begin anew. And what lies ahead for Clara and Wyatt? Perhaps it is raising a new generation who cherish the land and honor one another. Perhaps it is opening their doors to others lost on the trail, as Clara once was, offering them a place to rest and start again. Who knows one day, on the wide pages of Wyoming's wild history, the name Clara Mae Hale may stand not only as the wild rose, but as a builder of community, a bearer of hope, and proof that rebirth is always possible.